Hey guys, tonight we start in the mud and cold of northern France, where the 100 Years' War drags on and you probably won't survive the night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't the noise of battle, it's the silence between breaths. The war has stretched for decades, so long that soldiers measure time not by years but by how many winters their boots have survived. The air smells like wet iron and horse sweat, and each gust of wind bites through your cloak like a thief testing for weakness. You crouch near a dying fire, rubbing your hands together, but the heat barely licks your fingers before the cold steals it back. The mud under you has frozen into ridges sharp enough to bruise your knees, and you start wondering why anyone ever thought France was worth fighting for when it feels like the afterlife's waiting room. A distant banner flaps stiffly. England's cross or France's lilies, it's hard to tell anymore under the frost, and you realize how absurd it is that both sides still pretend there's glory in this. The mainstream historical fact here is that the war, lasting from 1337 to 1453, wasn't one endless fight but a brutal cycle of campaigns, truces, and disease. The quirky detail: some soldiers believed the devil himself froze their fingers to punish cowardice, so they'd hold their hands over flames till the skin blistered, calling it earning courage. Scholars still debate whether this was superstition or sheer stupidity, but either way, it explains why so many veterans had fingers like shriveled roots. As the wind moans through the bare trees, you can almost hear the ghosts of past campaigns whispering in the distance. Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt, all those places where men froze before they ever bled. You pull your cloak tighter, pretending you're one of the hard ones, the kind who joke through frostbite. At least, you mutter to yourself, the lice are too cold to bite tonight. Humor is your last shield. Without it, you'd crack like the ice forming on your water skin. A soldier nearby coughs into his sleeve, and the sound carries through the dark like a warning. Don't fall asleep. Everyone knows the rule. Sleep too long in the cold, and you won't wake up. The camp smells of wood smoke, tallow, and desperation. Men lie wrapped in whatever they can find: canvas, straw, cloaks once bright but now stiff with grime. Somewhere, a horse whinnies softly, its breath glowing white in the dark, and you wonder which of you, man or beast, has the better odds of surviving till dawn. The cold has a personality here. It creeps like an old tax collector, patient and thorough, collecting warmth as if it's owed. You remember hearing that, during the siege of Calais, English soldiers ate nothing but salted meat and onions for weeks, just to keep their blood thick and warm. Historians argue whether that diet actually worked, or simply made the camps smell like a poorly ventilated stew, but it's one of those details that make the past feel painfully human. You shift closer to the fire, noticing how the flames bend away from the wind as if afraid. Your breath fogs, and for a moment you pretend you're a dragon, tiny, freezing, and profoundly unimpressed with your life choices. The stars above are sharp, distant pinpricks, and the moon hangs low like a polished coin no one can afford. You imagine all the nobles snug in their tents lined with fur, sipping hot wine while peasants like you shiver outside. The English and French both claim God's on their side, yet he seems remarkably fond of watching them freeze. Faith builds character, one priest told you before the last campaign, and you think now that character isn't much use when your toes have gone numb. There's talk among the camp followers that some commanders, desperate to keep morale up, had fiddlers play lively tunes while soldiers marched through snowdrifts. The melodies, one chronicler wrote, froze in the air and fell silent before reaching heaven. Maybe that's why war feels endless here. The prayers, the songs, The promises all trapped midair, too cold to rise. You glance at your hands cracked, raw, trembling, and remember how the blacksmith back home once said steel never truly freezes. It just waits. Maybe people are the same. You see the fire reflecting in the puddle of half-melted ice by your boot, and for a second you swear it looks like a candle flickering on a chapel altar. You think about home, not the place but the feeling of being warm without earning it. Then someone shouts your name, and you're dragged back to reality. The captain's making rounds, barking orders about watch rotations and keeping the fires alive. It's a losing battle. The wood is damp, the men exhausted, and the cold always wins in the end. Still, you nod like you believe him, because belief, like warmth, is something you fake until it becomes real. By midnight, the frost has claimed the camp. The ground sparkles faintly under moonlight, beautiful if you forget what it means. You press your ear against your cloak, listening to your own heartbeat. Slow and steady, the only proof you're still here. The French lines are somewhere beyond the ridge, probably just as miserable. There's an odd comfort in that thought. Even enemies freeze the same. A passing archer mutters, "If the cold doesn't kill me, the smell will." And you laugh quietly, the sound brittle and brief. You both know humor's a lifeline. The last warmth left that can't be stolen by the night. In the early hours, the first flakes start falling, delicate as ash. The fire has died, the wood turned to ember dust. You lie back, staring at the sky, and wonder how many more nights like this lie ahead. The 100 Years' War isn't measured in battles but in sleepless nights and stubborn breaths. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolls frozen sound from a frozen town, and you whisper to yourself, still alive. Not proudly, not defiantly, just as a fact, like naming the stars you'll never reach. The war may belong to kings, but survival, this cold, gritty, ridiculous persistence belongs to you. You wake before dawn to the low groan of wagons and the snapping of frozen rope, your breath puffing out like a ghost that doesn't want to linger in this world any longer. The camp is still half asleep, a sprawl of tents rimmed with frost, their canvas stiff as bark, their seams glittering like someone sewed them with glass. A pot of something unidentifiable steams weakly over a small fire, a mix of oats, onion, and despair. You move closer anyway, because the smell of anything warm is better than the smell of everything else. And there it is, the iron. Not the good kind, not the forge kind. The air is thick with it, a metallic tang that seeps into your tongue every time you breathe. Historians will later say the smell of the 100 Years' War was equal parts smoke, sweat, blood, and mildew. But standing here now, you think they're missing one key note, the scent of people trying not to die. You pull your cloak tighter, glancing toward the armory, where a blacksmith hammers at a dented helmet with a rhythm that sounds almost like music. The sparks fly, brief fireflies against the gloom, and for a second you're hypnotized until you realize the hammer's not to make it shine, but to make it fit again after last night's frost warped the metal. There's a mainstream fact for you. Medieval armor was a miracle of craftsmanship. Yes, but it hated the cold. When the temperature dropped, the steel would contract and bite at the joints, so soldiers lined the inside with wool or leather until both froze solid too. One chronicler even claimed knights resorted to smearing animal fat on their armor to keep it supple, though no one agrees if that was ingenuity or insanity. The debate among scholars remains lively, mostly because nobody wants to test it personally. The smoke from the morning fires rolls low, heavy, and greasy. You can taste it before you see it. Everything smells faintly of burning oak, bread, cloth, sometimes flesh if you're unlucky enough to be near the surgeons. The cold turns smoke into something physical, a gray soup you have to wade through. You cough and wipe your nose with a sleeve that's already stiff from yesterday's frost. Someone nearby swears at a frozen buckle. Another laughs bitterly and says, "If hell freezes over, at least we'll know how to dress." You can't help chuckling. Humor here is a language of survival. There's a rumor going around the camp that French soldiers in the north burn their own armor before battles just to warm their hands. Nobody believes it, but everyone repeats it anyway. It feels comforting to imagine someone else is even more miserable than you. Across the camp, the cooks are cursing at their cauldrons. Boiling water takes forever in this kind of cold, and when it finally does, it freezes again around the rim like an insult from nature itself. You scrape a crust of bread with the tip of your knife, teeth chattering, and remember how people said war was glory. Whoever said that clearly had central heating. You step outside the camp lines, boots crunching on frost, and the morning hits you gray and endless. The battlefield stretches like a frozen swamp, dotted with skeletal trees and the occasional shape that might be a rock or might not be. You try not to look too closely. The English and French have been playing tug-of-war with this same patch of mud for years, and no one's sure who's winning anymore. Somewhere out there, a scout's horn blows, sharp and thin, and the sound dies instantly, swallowed by the air. You breathe deep, and even that hurts. Cold that sharp feels personal, like it knows your name. By midday, the fires start again. The blacksmith's hammer, the clatter of pots, the dull rhythm of war without battle. You sit with a few other soldiers, sharing jokes about frozen ale and the luxuries of noble life, mostly to forget that you'll be marching again soon. Someone starts telling the story of a knight who tried to warm his armor by hanging it over a fire, only to have it collapse like boiled tin. Nobody knows if it's true, but it's funny enough that you laugh until your sides ache. The joke travels fast. Within minutes, every group's retelling it with new embellishments. It's how stories live here. They mutate faster than wounds heal. The fringe tidbit of the day comes from a bearded archer who claims he once saw French troops light fires under catapults to keep the ropes flexible, only to have one snap mid-launch and fling a burning rock backward. You're skeptical, but it's too good a tale to dismiss. The scholarly debate continues centuries later. Did medieval armies truly use fire-warming tactics for siege engines, or is it just another exaggeration from bored chroniclers? Either way, it's a fine reminder that invention and stupidity often wear the same armor. As dusk settles, you feel the cold creeping back like an old enemy who knows your weak spots. The campfires glow again, red eyes in the dark. Men huddle close, breathing smoke, trading lies about home. The smell of iron and smoke clings to everything. Your hair, your hands, your dreams. You close your eyes and imagine spring, green fields, soft rain. But even in your imagination, the air still tastes of iron. You wonder if, when this war finally ends, France will ever stop smelling like this. Then you laugh quietly, because deep down you already know the answer. Probably not. You wake to a sound halfway between thunder and teeth chattering. Hundreds of soldiers banging their armor with wooden sticks to knock the frost loose. It's dawn again, or at least that dull gray hour that pretends to be morning when the sun's too cowardly to rise. The metal groans like a frozen river as men stretch and flex, trying to trick their bodies into believing this is warmth. You watch a knight struggle to lift his arm, his plates stiff from ice that formed overnight, and when he finally manages it, the movement sounds like breaking glass. You can't help grinning, mostly because it's either laugh or cry, and crying's a bad idea when your eyelids might freeze together. They say armor makes you invincible, but right now you'd trade every polished inch for a wool blanket and a decent fire. That's the first lesson of this war. Iron might save your life from arrows, but it's hopeless against the cold. The mainstream historical fact here is that during the 100 Years' War, many soldiers fought in freezing conditions so severe that armor had to be lined with linen or sheep's wool. It helped, but only slightly. Once damp, the fabric trapped cold air like a curse. Some knights carried lumps of charcoal under their breastplates to keep warm, a strategy one French chronicler called equal parts cleverness and madness. You imagine it. Noblemen roasting themselves slowly like chestnuts, muttering prayers to Saint Maurice, the patron saint of soldiers. The quirky tidbit: there's a surviving record of an English captain at Agincourt who allegedly tried to grease his armor with goose fat to stop frost from forming, and ended up smelling like roast dinner for 3 days straight. The debate still continues in historical circles about whether this was practical improvisation or just a desperation scented with poultry. You flex your fingers inside your gloves, feeling them protest. Even through the leather, the joints ache, slow and stiff like they've been replaced with old hinges. The man beside you has already wrapped strips of cloth around his toes and stuffed straw into his boots. Keeps the frost off, he says, even though it obviously doesn't. The ground crunches beneath you, frozen mud, horse droppings, crushed oats all welded into a surface so hard it could pass for stone. A drummer starts up in the distance, trying to keep morale alive, but the beat's too slow, too tired. The sound of armor striking armor takes over, a dull chorus, metal sighing under the weight of frost. You remember yesterday when one of the younger squires tried to pour boiling water over his helmet to thaw it. It worked for about 3 seconds before the metal cracked. Now he wears the dented remains like a soup bowl strapped to his head, pretending it's a fashion statement. Someone calls him Sir Kettle, and even the captain laughs. You realize that humor's the only heat most of these men have left. The air tastes of iron again. There's always that same tang, and the smoke from dying fires snakes between tents, stinging your eyes. A priest wanders by, muttering blessings over the sleeping and the wounded. He's bundled in so many layers he looks like a haystack that learned Latin. He stops near you, touches the tip of your gauntlet with 2 fingers and says, "Courage lies in endurance, my child." You nod politely, but your mind adds a silent reply. Courage also lies in dry socks. He moves on, disappearing into the mist, leaving behind a faint smell of incense and damp wool. Somewhere nearby, a horse exhales a long misty sigh that feels almost human. You pat its flank absently, grateful for the shared warmth. By midday, the sky brightens just enough to remind you that the sun still exists. You remove one glove and instantly regret it. Your skin goes from numb to burning in seconds. You press your hand against your armor's breastplate, and it sticks for a moment, frozen sweat acting as glue. You mutter something impolite under your breath, earning a grin from a fellow archer who's busy scraping ice off his bowstring. "They should have called it the 100 Freezing Years' War," he says. You laugh again, the sound dry and hollow, because honestly, he's not wrong. The scholarly debate here is whether cold weather strategy ever truly existed in this war. Some argue that both the English and the French simply endured rather than adapted, improvising with what they had. Others claim there were proto-logistical tactics, rotating troops between shelters, rationing fuel, assigning armorers to thaw metal by firelight. But standing here, your fingers stuck together and your breath turning solid, you know the truth. Strategy melts faster than snow when it meets reality. You survive by instinct, luck, and the occasional well-placed goose feather. As night falls again, the frost returns with a vengeance. The fire sputters, too wet to burn properly, and the smoke smells like damp wool and regret. You lie down beside your shield, using it as a makeshift wall against the wind. The stars are out again, sharp, cold, perfect, and for a moment you imagine them as the points of unseen spears, armies of the heavens watching your little war below. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet creak of armor around you, like a chorus of shivering ghosts. You think of tomorrow, of marching, of battles that might never come. The war stretches endlessly ahead, a frozen road you'll keep walking until your breath stops clouding the air. And still, somehow, you smile, because in this frozen hell, surviving one more night feels like victory. You wake to a rooster that doesn't belong to any army, its cry thin and ragged from some half-burned farm beyond the ridge. The sound drags you out of shallow sleep and for a moment you forget where you are, until the stink of unwashed bodies and wet straw pulls you back. Dawn hasn't warmed the sky yet, but a gray smear of light shows what the night left behind. Ruts from wagon wheels frozen into the mud, prints of bare feet from villagers who fled long before the soldiers even stirred. You rise stiffly, stamping life into your boots, and realize the battlefield may belong to kings, but the land belongs to people who never asked to be part of it. That's the quiet tragedy humming underneath this endless war. Peasants fighting a second, colder war against hunger, frost, and armies that steal their last loaf as casually as they take their breath. The mainstream historical fact here is that during the 100 Years' War, the countryside between major towns became a wasteland. Bands of soldiers, both French and English, pillaged villages not out of cruelty but necessity. Feeding an army was easier when someone else had already grown the grain. But that necessity didn't make it any kinder. The quirky tidbit is that some peasants took to painting charms on their doors, little circles of soot and milk to ward off soldiers, claiming that any man who crossed that mark would freeze in his own boots. Historians still argue whether the practice was genuine superstition or a subtle form of psychological warfare. Either way, it probably didn't work, since soldiers wore the marks on their shields for luck instead. You head toward the remains of a hamlet just over the rise. The ground is hard and uneven, each step a gamble between slipping or twisting an ankle. The houses are half collapsed, roofs bowed under the weight of snow and neglect. You pass a well that's frozen solid. Someone's carved the word vivre into the rim, live. You don't know whether it's a prayer, a command, or just the last joke of someone who didn't. Smoke drifts from one surviving chimney, thin and pale. When you knock, a woman answers, face red from cold, eyes sharp from years of watching strangers take what's hers. She doesn't flinch at your armor. She's seen too much of it. "You'll take wood, won't you?" she says, not even as a question. You shake your head and hand her a coin. It's not much, but her shoulders soften, and for a moment you feel like you've stolen a bit of warmth from the frost itself. Children peek from behind her skirt, wrapped in rags. One boy's holding a frozen turnip like treasure. You wonder how many winters they've counted since this war began. You can't even blame them for their silence. When everyone who speaks gets conscripted or cursed, quiet becomes the safest weapon. You ask about the nearest village, and the woman points south. "The English burned it," she says flatly, "but they missed the sheep." She almost smiles when she says it, a small rebellion in the corner of her mouth. You think about that, how survival itself is an act of defiance. As you walk away, the smell of her fire clings to your cloak. Wood smoke, potatoes, and something else, hope maybe. You follow the faint track toward a ruined chapel. The bell is gone, the tower cracked, but inside the stone walls someone's laid out bundles of straw for travelers. A small group of peasants huddle there, faces drawn and eyes cautious. One man asks if you've seen his wife, another, if the king has promised peace yet. You don't know how to answer either. What do you tell people who've lost everything to an argument over crowns? That their suffering has purpose, that history will remember them. You know it won't. History likes its heroes shiny and well-fed. The peasants are just footnotes, if that. Outside, a farmer pushes a broken cart through the snow, its wheels squealing like frightened animals. You help him lift it free, and he nods thanks before trudging on, leaving tracks that the wind will soon erase. That's how this landscape works. Every act of kindness swallowed by the cold before anyone notices. The scholarly debate still echoes among historians. Were peasants truly powerless victims or cunning survivors who learned to play both sides? You think maybe it's both. They endured the same war as kings but without banners or ballads, building lives in the gaps between battles. As evening falls, you see smoke rising from the next valley, a sure sign that another village's luck just ran out. You stop and watch the glow spread across the snow, orange against blue. Somewhere down there, people are running with buckets, shouting names, Somewhere else, soldiers are laughing over stolen wine. You pull your cloak tight, torn between guilt and exhaustion. The night wind carries voices, too faint to understand but heavy with meaning. Maybe they're praying. Maybe they're cursing. Maybe they're just talking to the cold, hoping it listens. You walk on until the firelight fades behind you, and the darkness ahead feels mercifully empty. Tomorrow, you'll march again. Tomorrow, there'll be more villages, more smoke, more names you'll forget. But tonight, as the snow thickens around your boots and your breath hangs silver in the air, you let yourself believe one impossible thing, that somehow, despite it all, the peasants will outlast the war. By morning your stomach feels like a hollow drum, echoing the clang of distant armor. The fire's gone out again, and someone's stolen what passed for breakfast, a crust of barley bread and a slice of something pretending to be cheese. Hunger sharpens everything. Smells, sounds, even memories. You start noticing the faint scent of yeast from the camp baker's tent, the way the steam curls above his half-broken oven like a miracle refusing to die. The 100 Years' War isn't won by swords, you think. It's lost by stomachs. Soldiers can fight through wounds, but not through emptiness. The mainstream historical fact here is grimly simple. During the long winters of the war, famine killed more people than combat. Supply lines froze, rivers clogged with ice, and grain shipments rotted in port towns. The quirky tidbit comes from an English cook's diary, who wrote that soldiers would reheat yesterday's porridge by staring at it sternly until it surrendered its chill. Scholars still debate whether that was sarcasm or the earliest known form of military mindfulness. Either way, you could use a bowl of that courage right now. You walk toward the food line, boots crunching on frost, following the scent of burning barley. The pot at the center is enormous, blackened from years of soot, and bubbling weakly with a concoction known affectionately as trench gruel. It's mostly water, with hints of oats, onion, and optimism. A cook with red hands and no patience ladles it into wooden bowls, barking next. Don't breathe on it. You'll cool it down. You take yours, cradle it like treasure, and blow carefully across the surface. It smells faintly of smoke, and something sweet, maybe beetroot, maybe a memory. You sip, and it's lukewarm, but it fills you all the same. Hunger is an amazing magician. It can turn misery into gratitude in a single mouthful. A man beside you mutters about the ale ration which has turned to slush in its barrels. Better that way, another answers, slower to drink, harder to regret. The camp erupts in half-hearted laughter. Someone chips the icy top off a mug and calls it the night's dessert. You grin despite yourself. The ale tastes metallic, bitter, and somehow noble in its stubborn refusal to stay liquid. It's proof that even barley can defy winter if it tries hard enough. You think of the bakers in towns like Rouen or Calais, kneading dough with frozen fingers, praying the yeast still lives. Bread in these times is both currency and miracle. One warm loaf could buy a week of loyalty or an evening of silence. The cooks tell stories as they stir. One swears that French soldiers once used hot stones from the forge to bake flatbread on their shields. Another claims the English boiled leather straps when flour ran out, seasoning them with salt stolen from monks. You're not sure which tale is worse, the hunger that inspired them or the taste that followed. Historians argue endlessly about the plausibility of those stories. Some say they're exaggerated propaganda meant to glorify endurance. Others insist that desperation makes all things edible. You think they're both right. You've seen men chew on hope itself and find it surprisingly chewy. When the meal's over, you lick the spoon clean, because wasting even one grain feels like a sin. The cook grins at you, missing 3 teeth, and says, "See, not dead yet. That's how we win." His words stick with you. Not glorious, not noble, just not dead yet. It's the most honest motto of this war. You wander to the edge of camp where barrels of ale sit half buried in snow. The frost makes them glisten like treasure chests. You chip off a shard of ice from one and hold it to the light. For a moment it catches the sunrise, turning gold. You think how strange it is that beauty still sneaks into places like this, uninvited and unpaid. Later that day, as smoke from cook fires curls into the pale sky, the priest returns with his daily sermon about moderation. He warns that gluttony is a sin, conveniently forgetting that no one here has eaten enough to commit it. The men nod politely while planning how to steal a second bowl. You wonder what sin starvation counts as. Probably none. It's too common to make the list. As night falls, the camp quiets except for the occasional clink of spoons against empty bowls. The fires dim to embers, and you can smell the ghost of the day's meal, grain, smoke, and a faint hint of yeast that refuses to give up. You lie back, the taste of warm gruel still clinging to your tongue, and for the first time all week your belly doesn't complain. You realize that survival, at its simplest, tastes like this, bland, smoky, and just enough. And as the cold presses in again, you whisper to yourself, half laughing, "At least the ale won't spoil tonight." The morning starts with the hollow thunk of a catapult arm locking into place somewhere beyond the mist, a reminder that even frost can't freeze ambition. You pull yourself upright, shoulders creaking, the wool of your cloak damp against your neck. The siege has lasted so long that the walls ahead look like another mountain range, gray, unchanging, and as indifferent as the weather. Snow drifts lazily across the trenches, covering bodies and barrels alike, erasing the difference between victory and failure. You can smell wet wool everywhere. It clings to soldiers the way guilt clings to generals. When it rains in winter, the world doesn't get cleaner, it just gets heavier. That's the rule no one tells you before the drums start. The mainstream fact. During sieges like Orléans, 1428-1429, both armies endured months of cold rain that turned their encampments into swamps. Chroniclers recorded horses sinking to their knees, tents collapsing under their own weight, and food stores ruined faster than they could be stolen. The quirky tidbit comes from a letter written by a Burgundian knight who swore that soaking his woolen socks in vinegar kept the spirits of frost away. Historians politely disagree on whether he meant actual demons or athlete's foot, but either way you're tempted to try it. The open scholarly debate still bubbles around how armies managed sanitation during these sieges. Some claim primitive drainage trenches, others insist people simply stood on planks and prayed for elevation. Standing here ankle-deep in slush, you suspect the second theory wins. By mid-morning, the rain turns needle-thin, icy but relentless. You watch soldiers wring out their sleeves, only for the fabric to freeze again within minutes. The smell is unforgettable. Damp cloth, cold ash, and the faint metallic tang of rusting armor. Someone jokes that if the enemy doesn't drown, the mold will get them. Another replies that mold has better morale than most of the troops. The laughter rises, ragged but real, and you join in because humor is the only dry thing left in camp. The engineers trudge past hauling ropes stiff as boards. Every creak of the siege tower sounds like complaint. You help push one of the giant wheels through mud that feels alive, sucking at your boots. When it finally lurches forward, a cheer goes up, short-lived because the wheel immediately sinks again. Maybe it's tired, someone mutters. You decide that sarcasm must have been invented at a siege. Even the crows circling overhead look bored, like critics waiting for the finale. Inside your tent, the wool walls drip steadily. The ground beneath is lined with reeds meant to keep moisture out, but now they serve mostly as decorative compost. You peel off your gloves, hold them near a candle, and watch steam curl upward like ghosts leaving the fabric. The tiny flame sputters with every gust that seeps through the seams. You whisper, half to yourself, you'd think after 100 years someone would invent waterproofing. The soldier beside you grins and replies, "They did. It's called staying home." Outside, the besieged city is eerily quiet. Smoke rises from behind the ramparts, the color of oversteeped tea. You imagine the people inside, bakers stretching flour, children chasing warmth across stone floors, priests measuring hope in candle inches. They're probably as cold as you are, maybe colder. War, you realize, doesn't pick favorites, it just picks directions. The thought softens you, then hardens you again, like everything else in this weather. By evening, the sky turns the color of pewter. The rain slows to a drizzle, but the cold deepens, sliding down your spine in practiced silence. Fires crackle feebly. Sparks hiss out before they can rise. A captain strides by shouting that morale is improving. You glance around. Half the men are asleep. The other half are wringing water from their sleeves, and you wonder what dictionary he's using. Still, you salute. Sarcasm only travels upward when whispered. Night brings the kind of cold that hums in your bones. You curl up inside your damp cloak, the wool scratchy but familiar, like a grumpy friend who refuses to leave. The rain starts again, tapping the canvas in lazy rhythm. Each drop sounds like a drumbeat from some distant army of clouds. You close your eyes and picture warmth the way poets describe love, impossible but worth believing in. Tomorrow you'll wake in the same mud, fight the same frost, wear the same wet wool. But tonight, as your breath fogs the dark and the siege mutters around you, you find a tiny, stubborn comfort in the thought that even misery can become routine, and routine in a war like this is just another word for survival. By now the war has settled into a rhythm, a miserable kind of music that plays every night, the hiss of wet logs, the crunch of boots, the shuffle of cards, and above it all, the low hum of gossip keeping men alive. The campfire's glow stretches thin across faces that have forgotten how to smile, painting everyone in shades of copper and smoke. You hunch close to the flames, watching sparks drift upward like messengers too small for heaven to notice. The fire's warmth barely reaches your fingers, but its light, its light feels like proof that you still exist. There's comfort in the ordinary ritual of it, stacking logs, stirring embers, pretending that a circle of light can hold the darkness at bay. Someone nearby strums a broken lute, and the tune melts into the smoke, half lullaby, half complaint. The mainstream fact. In winter campaigns of the 100 Years' War, fires weren't just luxuries. They were lifelines. Commanders often banned large bonfires to hide positions, but soldiers disobeyed whenever frostbite made obedience look overrated. Archaeologists have found blackened fire pits along old siege lines, each about a meter wide, enough to warm 10 men and reveal 1,000 secrets. The quirky tidbit is that soldiers believed firelight carried rumors faster than messengers. Some even swore that stories changed shape in the smoke like living things. One chronicle describes a group of archers claiming to see a flaming image of Joan of Arc's banner rising from their campfire weeks before she appeared at Orleans. Scholars argue whether this was hallucination, hope, or the world's earliest example of medieval clickbait. You stare into the flames and listen. The men are talking about her again, the girl from Domremy who supposedly speaks with angels, the one who says France will rise. She rides in white. Someone whispers, she prays before battle and never freezes. Maybe she's got fur under the armor. Another laughs. You join in, but quietly. Hope is dangerous in this cold. It warms you too quickly, then disappears. Still, her name ripples through the camp like heat. Jeanne, 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 Jeanne. A rumor glowing in the wind. Beyond the laughter, the night smells of roasting chestnuts and unwashed wool. A soldier offers you one, burned black on one side, and you bite anyway. It tastes like charcoal and victory, which are nearly the same thing these days. Over the fire, voices blend into a tapestry of half-truths. Someone swears the English king's gone mad. Another insists the French are summoning saints. It's all nonsense, but you let it wash over you. Words like warmth don't have to be true to keep you alive. A captain strolls by, his shadow long against the tent wall. Keep your fires low, he warns. The enemy's watching. He might as well ask snow not to fall. The soldiers nod. Wait until he's gone, then toss another log in anyway. The flames leap higher, defiant. You grin. It's the same small rebellion that's kept everyone breathing. The scholarly debate still lingers centuries later. Did rumor truly shape morale more than rations or leadership? Reading those papers, you suspect the scholars have never tried to sleep in frozen mud while praying for a story good enough to outlast despair. As the fire crackles, you find yourself staring at the faces around it. Lined, scarred, human. No one speaks of home anymore. Home feels like a fairy tale that ended mid-sentence. Instead, you talk about bread, boots, and the miracle of a dry morning. The wind shifts, scattering sparks toward the tree line, and for a heartbeat, it looks like the forest itself is whispering back. The rumor changes again. Someone claims the war will end by spring. Another says England's broke. Another that the moon's turning red as an omen. You smirk. Every winter night invents its own apocalypse. Later, when the fires die and the cold slithers in again, you pull your cloak tight and lie on your back, staring into the smoke-stained sky. The stars shimmer faintly, each one a rumor that never burned out. You close your eyes, listening to the last murmurs fading into sleep. Laughter, prayers, and lies blending together until they sound the same. The war will still be here in the morning. But for now, under the faint glow of dying embers, it feels far enough away that you can almost believe the rumors are right, that warmth means safety, that stories are armor, and that someday soon dawn will finally keep its promises. You wake to the sound of wings, not the noble kind that poets adore. No, these are crows, loud and unapologetic, arguing over breakfast somewhere beyond the camp ditch. The frost glints on their feathers like black glass as they hop between footprints, feasting on whatever the night has left them. There's something comforting in their honesty. Crows don't pretend to be heroes. They just show up to do their work. You envy that. The rest of the army spends its mornings pretending this war still makes sense. The mainstream fact is that crows were so common on battlefields during the 100 Years' War that chroniclers called them the soldiers who never lose. The quirky tidbit: some soldiers tossed coins to the birds before battle for luck, claiming the crows were messengers of Saint Michael who guided souls through fog. Historians can't decide if that was piety or gallows humor, and frankly, neither can you. The smell hits before the sight: iron, smoke, rot. You walk toward the ridge where the fighting happened 3 days ago. Your boots sinking into thawing slush. The snow's no longer white. It's the color of wet parchment. Broken arrows stick up like reeds, and half a cartwheel juts from the mud. You stopped counting the bodies long ago. Now you just look for anything that moves. The crows scatter as you pass, scolding you for interrupting. One particularly bold bird lands on a fallen helm and stares at you, head cocked as if deciding whether you'll be next. Not today, you tell it, flipping a coin in its direction. The bird hops forward, snatches the glinting metal, and flies off into the gray. Guess that's my tithe paid, you murmur, half laughing, half praying. A surgeon's tent stands at the edge of the field. The canvas flaps lazily, patched with old banners. Inside, the air smells of boiled linen and sour wine. The surgeon himself looks more corpse than man, eyes ringed in red, hands trembling from cold and fatigue. He nods at you but says nothing. Conversation wastes warmth. You help him hold a lantern while he sorts through his grim inventory. Bandages, knives, string, silence. He hums under his breath, an old tune about springtime that sounds cruel here. The scholarly debate later will circle around medical survival rates in medieval warfare. But standing here, you already know the answer. Survival depends on how many crows are left circling. You leave the tent and breathe the open air again. The snow begins to fall, soft but relentless, hiding what shouldn't be remembered. Men dig shallow trenches to bury what the birds don't take. The ground's too hard, so they pile stones instead. Someone cracks a joke about how the French will trip over these monuments next year, and the laughter that follows is the kind that hurts the ribs. You join in because it's the only sound that doesn't echo. At the far edge of camp, two mercenaries argue over payment. They decide the fairest judge is luck itself. A silver coin flashes in the air, catches the brief sunlight, then disappears into the snow. Heads, I live rich, one says. Tails, I live longer. It lands somewhere unseen, and neither bothers to look. You realize that's how everyone here lives, one toss away from being either myth or memory. As dusk closes in, the crows return. Their calls blend with the whine of wind through arrow shafts, an orchestra of persistence. You sit by the fire, the heat weak but steady, and watch them settle in the distance. There's something strangely holy about their black silhouettes against the pale snow, like punctuation marks ending the day's sentence. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the coin pouch at your belt, suddenly lighter. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe some debts should stay paid in feathers. You close your eyes, listening to the crows argue one last time before dark, and whisper to yourself that they've earned their share of the spoils. The war belongs to kings, but the aftermath, the cold, the silence, the scavenging belongs to them. And in a world that's forgotten mercy, that feels almost fair. By the time you reach the next market town, you've learned the scent of war better than the sound of it. Smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of desperation. The soldiers march through the gate like ghosts wrapped in rags, and the townsfolk eye them with that peculiar blend of pity and profit that only wartime can teach. The cobblestones are slick with thawed snow, and stalls line both sides of the street. Piles of wool, sacks of salt, bundles of herbs that promise warmth or healing depending on who's buying. You can feel the prices rising as you walk by. Everything here costs double when the nights are long. A handful of barley, 2 coins. A pair of gloves, half a week's pay. Hope, negotiable. The mainstream fact is simple. The 100 Years' War didn't just make soldiers. It made merchants rich. Quartermasters, brokers, and black market dealers followed the armies like loyal dogs, trading iron for bread and bread for gold. Inflation became its own weapon. In towns like Rouen and Bordeaux, a loaf of bread could cost more than a sword by winter's end. The quirky tidbit, recorded by a Flemish traveler in 1419, claims that one enterprising merchant sold snow water blessed by monks to soldiers, marketing it as protection against frostbite. Scholars still argue whether this was genuine fraud or genius-level marketing centuries ahead of its time. Either way, the fellow retired rich while the rest froze politely. You drift toward a spice stall, drawn by the impossible aroma of cinnamon and clove. The merchant, wrapped in layers of fur, smiles like a man allergic to charity. Imported from Venice, he says, smells like heaven, burns like hell. You raise an eyebrow. Who can afford spice in a season like this? He winks. Soldiers will buy anything that reminds them of warmth. You hand him a coin, not for the spice but for the idea of it. The scent lingers as you walk away, defiant against the stench of campfire smoke and poverty. Down the street, a tinker sharpens daggers while a boy sells candles made from animal fat. The candles smoke black and drip fast, but they sell out before sunset. A pair of washerwomen argue with a tailor over the cost of mending torn sleeves. If you can afford a war, one snaps, you can afford a stitch. You almost laugh, the logic's flawless and utterly useless. The truth is, the entire economy here runs on misery's momentum. The more soldiers suffer, the more someone else thrives. You stop at a stall selling boots, used, cracked, but dry. The merchant looks you over and guesses your rank wrong, quoting a noble's price. You don't correct him. Instead, you offer an old arrowhead and half a promise to return with coin. He nods, Satisfied, promises spend just as well as silver when survival's the currency. The scholarly debate will later rage over whether wartime merchants prolonged the conflict by feeding both sides, but looking around this market, you know that's the wrong question. They didn't prolong war, they perfected it. As evening falls, torches flicker along the street, turning frost into glitter. Music drifts from a tavern doorway. A fiddle, a drum, laughter that sounds forced but welcome. Inside, men in half armor drink beside men in robes. Enemies in daylight, drinking companions after dark. You order ale, thick enough to chew and listen to the chatter. News travels faster in places like this. You hear that Burgundy might switch sides again, that England's coffers are empty, that France is cursed by its own priests. None of it's true, and all of it's true. That's the magic of rumor. It trades as easily as bread, and keeps you full longer. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and secretive. You wrap your cloak tighter and glance back once at the market square. The fires are dimming, but the merchants still count their coins by the glow, faces lit like saints of commerce. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, marking another day sold, another night purchased with frost and sweat. You walk on, the smell of spice still clinging faintly to your sleeve, and wonder if there's a profit to be made from hope itself, because if there is, someone's already selling it. The road south winds through fields silvered by frost, a world that looks peaceful until you notice how quiet it is, too quiet, the kind of silence that remembers screaming. You spot a monastery on the horizon, its stone walls rising from the mist like a promise of shelter. The gates are open, which means they're either generous or desperate. You step inside, boots clicking on frozen cobbles, and the air instantly changes, cool, dry, and smelling of smoke, wax, and something green beneath it all, crushed herbs. Inside, monks in thick brown robes move like shadows between rows of clay jars. The flicker of their candles paints halos on the walls, though you suspect the saints have taken the winter off. The mainstream fact is that monastic houses were the frontline hospitals of this endless war. Their apothecaries blended theology and botany, offering prayers for the soul and poultices for the flesh. In accounts from both sides, the monks of northern France were known for their healing balms made from honey, garlic, and wine, effective mostly because honey kept the rot at bay. The quirky tidbit here is that some chroniclers swore monks spoke charms to warm the blood of freezing soldiers, breathing words into cups of spiced mead as if holiness could be inhaled. Whether that counts as medicine or morale depends entirely on your body temperature. The scholarly debate that still drifts through academic halls today is whether monastic medicine truly saved lives or merely comforted the dying. Looking around, you think maybe the difference didn't matter. A brother leads you to a wooden bench near the hearth. He offers a cup of steaming liquid that smells of mint, vinegar, and something that could just as easily be despair. You drink anyway. The warmth spreads down your throat, and suddenly you understand why men keep coming here, even when the front lines are closer than their next breath. The monk smiles faintly. Herbs do not heal, he says. They remind the body how to try. You nod, pretending you understand. Outside, the wind keens through the bell tower, and for a heartbeat the sound feels alive, like the earth itself sighing through the cold. Shelves line the apothecary. Jars of ground bark, dried rose petals, and powder the color of moss. Each label is written in looping Latin that looks suspiciously like hopeful poetry. The air is thick with the scent of sage and tallow, undercut by the faint sweetness of fermenting honey. One monk grinds herbs in a mortar, the rhythmic scrape almost soothing. Another reads aloud from a battered book about the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and how frost unbalances them. Too much cold in the bones invites melancholy, he recites. You think too much cold in the tent invites frostbite, but keep that to yourself. A soldier on the next cot is missing 2 fingers wrapped in linen stained with wine. He tells you that the monks make poultices from nettle leaves to draw out fever. It stings, he says with a grin, but so does being alive. You can't argue with that logic. The monk tending him crosses himself before lighting another candle, muttering a prayer that sounds halfway between Latin and exhaustion. The flame trembles but doesn't die. That seems like a metaphor everyone in this place already understands. You ask the apothecary whether the herbs ever run out. Always, he says, but God replenishes through travelers. You glance at the basket beside your feet, where soldiers have dropped coins, ribbons, and even a bent spoon as offerings. It's less a donation box and more a confession pile, proof that hope is a kind of currency. You reach into your pocket and add your last bit of dried bread. The monk nods solemnly, as if that's exactly what the medicine required. By dusk, the bell rings for vespers. The chanting begins, low, steady, echoing through cold stone. The monks' voices weave with the wind, and for the first time in weeks, you feel something close to peace. The world outside is still frozen, the war still grinding on. But in this moment, surrounded by herbs and hymns, you remember what warmth sounds like. As you step back into the night, the scent of sage clings to your cloak. You breathe deep, whisper a thank you you're not sure who to, and walk toward the dark horizon where smoke still marks the front. Somewhere behind you, a monk closes the gate and murmurs a final blessing that follows you into the cold. Endure and be kind, for both heal slowly. The next dawn drips pale light through fog thick as soup, and every sound feels dampened, the clang of armor, the creak of carts, even the shouts of officers. Across the churned field, longbowmen are already awake, flexing their shoulders like men about to lift mountains. You shuffle closer to watch, because rumor says English archers are born half tree, half trouble. They stand in uneven lines, bowstrings coiled like muscle, breath ghosting in the air. It's a quiet ritual before chaos, a ballet of frost and discipline. When one of them loses a test arrow, the sound slices through the mist like truth through politics. The mainstream fact is that England's longbowmen were the superweapons of this war, able to fire 6 arrows a minute, each with the strength to pierce armor at 200 yards. Chroniclers credited their success to constant practice and absurd diets heavy in beef and ale, as if biceps could win kingdoms. The quirky tidbit: excavations of archers' skeletons show enlarged shoulder bones from years of drawing 100-pound bows, some so warped they could almost be mistaken for wings. The open scholarly debate that still rattles lecture halls is whether cold weather shortened the bow's effective range by stiffening the yew, or whether skill made physics irrelevant. Watching these men warm their strings over small fires, you suspect the truth lives somewhere between science and sheer stubbornness. A grizzled sergeant gestures toward you with his bow. "You're standing where the arrows land," he says cheerfully. You step aside. The men laugh, the sound rough but honest. Someone starts singing a tune about St. Crispin, and half the line joins in until the captain glares. Archers are a different breed, half craftsmen, half comedians. They argue about feathers and wind as if the world depends on it, and perhaps it does. One archer, missing 2 teeth but none of his pride, shows you his string wax, a blend of tallow and beeswax. "Keeps her supple," he says, stroking the bow like it's alive. Same trick works for mustaches. You nod solemnly. There's no arguing with expertise of that magnitude. As the sun climbs, the frost melts just enough to turn the ground into soup again. The archers line up 50 across, each motion smooth as breath. The captain calls, and in one unified draw the air fills with tension you can taste. Arrows rise like a flock of black geese, vanish into mist, and moments later the faint thud of impact ripples through the cold. No cheers, no bravado, just quiet satisfaction. You realize that for them, each shot is its own prayer. brief, deadly, and aimed toward an uncertain heaven. The French knights across the field don't appear yet, but their campfires still smoke, defiant. The archer next to you gestures with his chin. They've got armor thicker than reason, he mutters, but it won't save them if they can't lift it. He grins. You find yourself smiling back because sarcasm is the only thing both sides share freely. A messenger gallops through the mud, shouting orders you can't quite hear. The archers prepare again, tightening bowstrings, adjusting hoods. They don't pray for victory, only for dry fingers. By noon, the fog thins enough for sunlight to sting your eyes. You watch the men practice trick shots, splitting arrows on old barrels, competing for nothing but bragging rights. One misses spectacularly and bows with exaggerated grace, earning applause from the rest. You realize their humor isn't arrogance, it's armor. Every joke keeps fear a little farther away. As evening falls, they gather around a small fire, drying their strings over the coals, careful not to scorch them. Someone pours ale, someone else plays dice with pebbles, and the stories start again, of Agincourt's mud, of French cavalry, of a rain of arrows so thick it darkened the sun. The wind carries their laughter across the camp, mingling with the crackle of flames and the far-off clang of hammers repairing armor that tomorrow's arrows will puncture again. You pull your cloak tighter, glance toward the yew bows stacked neatly like sleeping serpents, and wonder how something so simple can hold so much power. When the fire burns low, one archer hums a tune. A lullaby his mother sang, he says, to keep wolves away. It seems to work. The camp grows still. The boughs gleam faintly in the last light, and for one rare moment, the war feels paused. You lie back in the mud, watching the stars stretch above the smoke, and think that perhaps faith takes many forms: a whispered prayer, a sharpened arrow, or just the quiet certainty that when dawn comes, you'll draw the string again. You wake to a sound you've never heard before, a deep, brittle groan rolling beneath your feet. The river has frozen solid overnight, a glass road stretching from one bank to the other, glittering under a pale sun. The camp stirs in disbelief. Horses stamp nervously, testing the surface with hooves that echo like drum beats. Someone mutters that even God must have decided to change the terrain. You crouch down, press a gloved hand against the ice, and feel it hum faintly, alive and uncertain. For a moment you imagine the war itself holding its breath, waiting to see who dares to cross first. The mainstream fact: in the winter of 1430, parts of the Seine and Loire froze so completely that armies used them as makeshift highways. Wagons rolled where ships once sailed, and men marched where fish once swam. The quirky tidbit comes from a letter written by a Parisian merchant who claimed he saw soldiers sliding more than marching, some strapping bits of wood to their boots to move faster, accidental inventors of ice skates centuries before Holland claimed the honor. The open scholarly debate remains whether commanders truly planned campaigns around these frozen crossings or simply improvised when opportunity or frost presented itself. Standing here now, you suspect improvisation, as always, wore the crown. The order comes just before noon. Move the supplies across before the thaw. You join the long line snaking toward the ice, every man dragging something: barrels, wheels, nerves. The surface sings under the weight, an eerie music of cracks and sighs. Halfway across, a wagon wheel slips, sending a chorus of curses skyward. The ice holds, barely. You catch yourself staring down into the frozen water below, where faint shapes drift, branches, bubbles, maybe bones. It's like looking into another world that decided to quit moving before yours did. At the far bank, officers shout for speed, afraid the ice will change its mind. The sun's warmth feels like betrayal. You slip twice, laugh once, and realize everyone's walking with that strange, stiff-legged dignity that only terror can teach. A horse neighs wildly, skidding sideways. Half the men cheer when it finds its balance again. Nobody breathes properly until the last wagon clatters onto solid ground. Then, as if to mock your relief, a section of ice gives way with a thunderous crack. The river exhales, and steam rises where the water reclaims its own. The sound is both terrifying and beautiful, like the world reminding you who's in charge. That night, fires bloom along the bank, their reflections trembling across the ice. Soldiers toast their luck with frozen ale, declaring themselves masters of land and water. You sip carefully, knowing both are liars. The cold creeps back with its usual patience, curling around your ankles, whispering that tomorrow the river might not forgive your footprints. A captain boasts that even nature fights for whichever side pays better. You glance toward the melting path and think nature doesn't take sides. It just waits to collect the winners. As the stars appear, the river begins to sing again, a low, shifting rumble that sounds almost like breathing. You lie down near the embers, listening to that rhythm. It's oddly soothing, like a lullaby from the earth itself. You realize that armies might march and kings might claim victory, but the river, cold, merciless, eternal, will outlive them all. The frost may fade by morning, but for now, under the shimmer of frozen light, you feel caught between two worlds, one of ice that remembers everything, and one of men who never do. When you open your eyes, the world is white, not the peaceful white of chapel candles or clean linen, but the heavy, smothering white that presses sound into silence. Your tent has sagged in the night, the canvas bowing inward beneath a blanket of snow so thick it feels like another roof, one built by winter itself. You push at it from inside, and a slow cascade tumbles down, sliding like sand off a dying hourglass. Every breath you take feels powdered, dry, tasting faintly of ashes. The first thing you hear is a muffled curse from a neighboring tent, then laughter, the kind that's equal parts relief and madness. Still breathing, someone calls out, "That's today's miracle." You grin into the dark. The miracles are getting smaller, but they're still there. The mainstream fact. Armies during the 100 Years' War rarely halted for weather. Even buried camps kept their posts, clearing snow by torchlight to keep from freezing in their own sleep. Chroniclers describe soldiers wrapping their tents in animal hides and sewing extra cloth around seams, turning each shelter into a small steam room of breath and hope. The quirky tidbit belongs to a Gascon archer who wrote in his diary that he sprinkled salt on the roof of his tent so the snow would not stick as it does to beef. Historians laugh about it, but you can't help admiring the logic. The open scholarly debate still lingering in university halls questions whether these camps truly endured blizzards or whether chroniclers exaggerated to glorify endurance. Anyone who's ever woken beneath snow like this knows exaggeration had nothing to do with it. You crawl outside. The camp looks like a graveyard of white mounds, each one a tent or a man. Smoke curls from a few surviving fires, faint and blue against the pale. The sky has no color at all, just brightness. A few soldiers move through the drifts, bundled in every scrap they own, their shapes more beast than human. One waves at you with a mitten that might have been a sock yesterday. "Coffee?" he jokes. You stare at him blankly. No one here has ever seen coffee. "Hot water, then," he amends, holding out a dented cup filled with something that smells faintly of onion and melted snow. You drink, cough, thank him anyway. The silence of morning is strange. No horns, no shouting, only the occasional whinny of a horse digging for grass it won't find. You hear the faint creak of leather as men check armor straps that froze overnight. The smell of wet wool and smoke fills your lungs, grounding you in the present. You think about how this war keeps teaching new definitions for comfort. A warm breath, a full belly, a tent that doesn't collapse. Someone somewhere is probably writing poems about valor and destiny, but you suspect they've never tried to relight a fire with fingers that won't bend. You wander to the edge of camp where the drifts form little walls, each topped by a crown of frost. Beyond them lies the forest, black and skeletal against the glare. The sun's rising, but its light gives no heat, just contrast. You spot tracks winding away. Rabbits, maybe foxes, maybe deserters. Hard to tell the difference when everyone's hunting survival. A priest stands nearby, brushing snow off a wooden cross stuck into the ground. "It's lighter than stone," he says softly, noticing you watch. "Easier to carry if we must move again." You nod. Even faith has learned to travel light. By midday the tents glisten, dripping in the weak sun. You help a few men dig out the cooking pit, and the first hiss of boiling water sounds like victory itself. Steam rises, ghostly and warm, curling around faces cracked from cold. Someone hums a tune about spring, half mockery, half prayer. You feel something in your chest ease. Maybe it's just thawing. When the snow finally starts to slide from the tent roofs, it's like the camp is exhaling all at once, a slow breath shared by hundreds of stubborn lungs. That night, the cold returns, gentler now, but still watching. You lie beneath the patched canvas, listening to the creak of ropes and the whisper of wind. Each flake that lands above sounds like a heartbeat slowed to patience. You think of tomorrow, more marching, more white horizons, but for the first time in days, the air inside your tent feels almost soft. The snow above insulates the noise, the fire outside throws a dim orange shadow on the wall, and you drift off with the faintest smile. Maybe this is how survival actually works, not by strength or strategy, but by learning to find warmth in a tent that shouldn't stand and sleep in a world that refuses to stop snowing. The snow stops sometime before dawn, leaving a silence so complete you can hear your own pulse in your ears. You open your eyes to pale blue light leaking through the seams of the tent. For the first few seconds, you can almost pretend you're waking in your own bed until your breath blooms white above you and your blanket of patched canvas smells of smoke and old leather. The camp is still, muffled beneath its blanket of white, and the only motion is from a horse snorting steam like a kettle beside the supply wagon. Hunger gnaws, but softer now, like a memory fading. You pull your cloak tighter and let yourself drift somewhere warmer, somewhere with walls. That's the trap of winter. It teaches the body to dream of fireplaces. You picture your mother's cottage, or maybe a tavern that only exists in your imagination, one with stew that doesn't taste of smoke and bread that doesn't freeze at the edges. You can almost hear the creak of a chair by the hearth, feel the tickle of heat on your palms. For a few heartbeats, it's real. Then a shovel hits frozen earth outside and the spell breaks. The mainstream fact is that soldiers in this war often suffered from what later chroniclers called camp melancholy, a weariness born not just of battle but of endless waiting. Monks wrote of men who lost their grip on reality after months in the cold, talking to fires like they were friends. The quirky tidbit comes from a Burgundian letter that describes soldiers sleeping with baked stones wrapped in cloth, claiming the stones remembered the sun better than human hearts did. Scholars still debate whether such stories were metaphor or actual practice. You decide it doesn't matter. Anything that holds warmth becomes sacred here. A few tents over, someone hums a lullaby so faint it sounds like a thought escaping. You poke your head out and see a young soldier sitting by a guttering flame, eyes closed, hands extended to the last bit of heat. He smiles when he catches you watching. "Home's a rumor, isn't it?" he says. You nod. Rumor or not, it's the only one that keeps people marching. By mid-morning, the air has that metallic taste that means the sky's about to break again. The captain orders a patrol to the nearby village, hoping for supplies, or at least distraction. You volunteer. Not from bravery, but because moving feels like living. The road is half ice, half mud, and entirely cruel. Every step squeaks or sloshes. You pass a frozen pond that reflects the world upside down, and for a dizzy second you imagine walking into it, into the reflection where the snow melts backward and the fires stay lit. The village is half buried. roofs like sleeping beasts under snowdrifts. Smoke still rises from a chimney or two. Faint and brave, a woman opens her door when you knock, looks at your armor, and sighs the sigh of someone who's run out of fear. She gives you a bowl of thin broth before you can speak, muttering, "For the king, or whichever one you serve this week." You eat it standing by the fire, the warmth sharp and alive against your face. The wooden beams crack softly overhead, and you think of all the homes lost between here and Calais, the hundreds of fires that burned once and never again. The smell of her soup stays with you long after you leave. That night, back in camp, you find yourself telling stories, not about war, but about meals. Everyone joins in: roasted chestnuts in Paris, sweet cider in Kent, honey cakes in Rouen. For a few hours the campfire becomes a tavern, the snow a carpet, and the wind just a drunk friend singing too loudly. Someone jokes that they'll open an inn when the war ends, and everyone laughs, knowing none of you will. Later, when the fire burns low, you lie on your back, staring at the stars. They look exactly as they did when you were a child. That feels unfair somehow, that the heavens don't notice your frostbitten toes or the ache in your shoulders. You exhale and watch your breath float upward, another offering to the indifferent sky. Then you close your eyes and dream, not of glory, not of peace, but of bread fresh from an oven, of a door that doesn't flap in the wind, and of waking to warmth that doesn't vanish when you open your eyes. By the time the next supply convoy limps through the snow-choked road, word has drifted through camp like smoke from a far-off chimney. The kings and dukes are spending the winter in comfort. You hear about their courts, warm halls, roaring hearths, roasted pheasant, velvet cloaks lined with fur. The rumor spreads in exact detail, as if each man here once stood in those golden rooms. It's easier to believe that someone, somewhere, is warm. You imagine it while scraping frost from your beard, a table heavy with wine, a harp singing in the corner, courtiers debating who looked best in crimson, while outside, the world freezes into silence. The mainstream fact: while soldiers bled into frozen mud, monarchs did hold winter courts, Paris, Westminster, Rouen, each lit by candles and politics. These gatherings weren't just indulgent, they were strategy. Treaties were signed beside firelight, taxes levied to pay for more war. The quirky tidbit appears in an English household roll listing: 20 cords of wood and 30 bottles of spiced claret consumed during Advent, proving that diplomacy burns hotter than battle. Scholars still debate whether such luxury fueled resentment or simply kept kingdoms functioning. From where you stand, covered in grime and frost, the answer feels obvious. Around your fire that night, someone recites mock court poetry. My lady's lips are wine and fire, while my own are cracked and dire. Laughter bursts like sparks. For a few moments, satire becomes rebellion. A sergeant raises a tin cup and toasts His Majesty of mud and blisters, and the entire trench roars approval. Joking about kings is dangerous in daylight, but in darkness, every man's a fool and philosopher both. Later, a messenger rides in from headquarters, boots clean, cloak dry. He delivers orders sealed in wax, careful not to make eye contact. You imagine the scent of that wax resin, not wood smoke, and hate it for being warm somewhere else first. The message says reinforcements will arrive when the weather softens. The phrase makes everyone laugh until they cough. The weather, like the war, has no sense of humor. Still, even resentment can't fully kill fascination. In the quiet hours, you picture those courts again. The queen's handmaids gossiping beside tapestries, pages running with parchment, the steady crackle of fire in marble hearths instead of wet logs. You imagine what they'd say if they saw you now. Mud up to your knees, armor dulled, scarf tied with string. Perhaps they'd pity you. Perhaps they'd envy you for seeing the world they only read about in reports, the cost of the crown's decisions written in frostbite and hunger. When dawn creeps back, Pale and slow, the anger fades with the stars. You stamp your feet, breathe warmth into your gloves, and watch the horizon blush faintly pink. Maybe somewhere beyond that sunrise a king is stirring his wine by the fire, whispering that this year's campaign will bring glory. You smile at the thought, not bitterly, but with a tired kind of amusement. Let them keep their courts, their velvet, their maps. You have the wind, the mud, and the company of men who know the difference between stories told in comfort and those survived in the cold. And as you shoulder your pack, you realize you wouldn't trade places after all. Warmth without purpose, you think, is just another form of numbness. One. You quote V learned that silence is the truest sound of winter, but today it's broken by the soft scratch of quills. The order came this morning. Every man who can still write must send a letter home. You're not sure whether it's meant to raise morale or to remind the living that they're still expected to have someone waiting for them. You borrow a stub of a candle, a scrap of paper that looks like it's been recycled from a tax roll, and a frozen inkwell that needs to be warmed between your palms before it flows again. Around you, the camp hums faintly. Hundreds of men whispering to ghosts that live beyond the snow. The mainstream fact: literacy among soldiers was rare, so letters were often dictated to scribes who moved from tent to tent, charging a coin per paragraph or accepting bread as payment. The quirky tidbit comes from a surviving bundle of these correspondences. One archer supposedly asked his wife to keep the pigs from learning to read because he feared she'd sell them to the English if they could sign their own names. Historians still debate whether such lines were genuine or the product of bored scribes with a sense of humor. You decide the difference doesn't matter. Laughter travels faster than ink. The scribe nearest you sits cross-legged on a crate, breath frosting the air as he dips his quill. His fingers are stained blue-black, the same color as the veins running across his wrist. You dictate slowly, unsure what to say. Tell her I'm well. You begin, which is the oldest lie in the world. The scribe nods, patient, used to fiction. Tell her the food's good. Another lie. Tell her the snow looks like the flour she used to scatter on the table before baking. That part's true, and the thought warms you briefly before it hurts again. The scribe blows on the ink to dry it and reads the words back softly, almost reverently, as though repetition might make them real. In another corner of camp, men cluster around a single patch of firelight, sealing their letters with lumps of wax stolen from church candles. The wax is brittle and full of ash, so the seals crumble easily, promises already cracking. You see one man fold his paper into his helmet instead of giving it to the courier. Just in case, he mutters, and you know exactly what he means. Some letters were never meant to travel outward. They're written to keep a soul tethered, not to be delivered. You step outside your tent for a moment of quiet. The wind slides through the camp like a whispering messenger, carrying the smell of ink, smoke, and unspoken words. Snowflakes land on your page before you can tuck it away, blurring the ink into faint blue stains. It looks almost artistic, like the sky itself is editing you. You smile at the absurdity. In another century, some scholar will probably study the stains and call them evidence of sentiment. If only they could feel how cold your fingers are. When the courier finally departs, the men line up with their folded papers, some tied with twine, some with bits of hair or cloth. He packs them carefully into a leather satchel, the letters rustling like dry leaves. They'll reach Paris, he says, or heaven. One of the two. You watch him ride off into the white horizon, the bag bouncing at his side, and you imagine each letter glowing faintly through the snow like embers refusing to die. That night, no one talks much. The act of writing has drained what little warmth was left. The fires burn low, and men stare at them in silence, each lost in the same thought. The faces behind those letters, the lives paused and waiting. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, unfold your own copy, and read it once more by flickering light. The ink has smeared where the snow touched it, turning the word home into something that looks like hope. You decide not to correct it. Some mistakes are worth keeping. You wake to the faint clatter of wooden buckets and the rhythm of muffled laughter that doesn't belong to soldiers. Through the gray dawn mist, you see shapes moving near the well. Women, maybe a dozen of them, their skirts heavy with frost, hair wrapped in scarves the color of old smoke. They move through the camp like ghosts that refuse to haunt politely. They're laundresses, cooks, healers, scavengers, whatever the army needs, and history forgets. Some carry baskets of bread, others carry nothing but tired eyes. You watch one stoop to collect frozen linen from a line, break the ice by hand, and smile as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Maybe it is. The mainstream fact. Women followed armies across Europe throughout the 100 Years' War. Officially, they were forbidden. Unofficially, they were indispensable. They cooked, mended, hauled water, tended wounds, and carried news faster than any herald. The quirky tidbit buried in one chronicler's notes describes how some laundresses dyed their hands blue with woad, so frostbite wouldn't show, claiming the color frightened away death. The scholarly debate that still lingers centuries later argues whether they were brave survivors or simply victims of circumstance. Watching them now, laughing, cursing, coaxing fire from damp twigs, you suspect they were both because survival doesn't care which story sounds better. A young woman with a patchwork shawl passes you, balancing a pot of stew on her hip. "Don't just stare, soldier," she says. "Eat." You take the bowl, steaming faintly, and the scent hits you. Lentils, salt, and something that smells like patience. "I'll pay." You start, but she waves a gloved hand. "You'll pay by not dying today, that's worth more than coin." You eat in silence, the warmth crawling back into your chest one cautious heartbeat at a time. Around you, men line up for scraps, joking badly, flirting worse. The women respond with practiced mockery, matching wit for wit until laughter hangs in the air like fog that refuses to freeze. Later, you find two of them by the stream, washing uniforms in water that steams from their own breath. Their hands are red and raw, knuckles split, but they keep scrubbing, humming an old tune that could be a prayer or just rhythm. "Doesn't it hurt?" you ask. One shrugs. "Everything hurts," she says. "This one just keeps us clean." Her friend grins without looking up. "Besides, we'd freeze faster if we stopped." You realize their laughter isn't denial, it's defiance. Every grin is a small rebellion against the kind of world that writes songs for kings but forgets who boiled the water. When night comes, the camp quiets but doesn't sleep. Fires flicker low, and the women sit close together, sewing by candlelight. Their silhouettes ripple like shadows on a chapel wall. You hear bits of conversation: who lost a husband, who found a coin, who's leaving when the snows melt. Someone mentions Joan of Arc, her name whispered like a secret spell. "A girl like us," one says, "but with better armor." The others laugh softly, and for a heartbeat the air feels warmer, as if the thought of her alone could bend winter's edge. The debate among historians, how many women truly lived in these camps, will never find an answer, because names were rarely written down. They existed between the lines of history, in the steam rising from pots, and the songs hummed under breath. You think of your letter from last night, of the word that smeared into hope, and wonder how many of these women will ever be mentioned in anyone's ink. Probably none. But they don't seem to need it. They're too busy surviving in real time. As you crawl into your tent, you catch one last glimpse of them gathered near the well, laughing as snow begins to fall again. The sound doesn't fade. It stays with you, soft and strong, weaving itself into the rhythm of the night. And you realize something the history books will never say, that the bravest hearts in this frozen war don't carry swords. They carry buckets, needles, and songs, and somehow they never stop moving. By dawn, the camp smells of vinegar and ash. That's how you know the surgeons are already at work. The air is sharp with the scent of boiled linen, iron, and something darker beneath it, the metallic whisper of pain. You follow the sound of voices into the largest tent, where the light glows red through canvas. Inside, the world shrinks to a handful of shapes: men lying on straw, torches smoking, and a surgeon bent over a leg that used to belong to a marcher but now belongs to the cold. His knife flashes once, quick and quiet, like a thought that refuses to linger. The mainstream fact is as brutal as the winter itself. Battlefield medicine during the 100 Years' War was less about healing and more about preventing rot. Amputations were done without anesthesia, cauterized with boiling oil or heated iron, while snow served as both anesthetic and antiseptic for those unlucky enough to be outside the tent. The quirky tidbit appears in the diary of a French surgeon who swore by mulled wine poured over the wound to cleanse it. Half treatment, half toast. Historians still debate whether that was genuine medical practice or simply an excuse for everyone involved to feel a little less conscious of what they were doing. Standing here now, you suspect both. The surgeon beside you hums under his breath as he works a monk's hymn turned into rhythm. "Hold him," he says, and two soldiers grip the patient's shoulders. The knife descends, steam rising as it meets snow-packed flesh. The man doesn't scream, he's beyond it. You realize with a small shudder that silence is sometimes louder than agony. When it's done, the surgeon drops the knife into a bucket of hot water that's more brown than clean and mutters, "Next." Another man is carried in. The process repeats. It's a grim choreography, a ritual as old as war itself. A young apprentice approaches with a bundle of dried herbs and honey. He stirs them into a paste, murmuring, "Sweetness keeps the rot away." You ask what the herbs are. "Yarrow and thyme." He answers, "And faith, if we have any left." The smell is unexpectedly comforting, like kitchens you've never had. He spreads the mixture over a wound, ties it with cloth, and smiles faintly when the patient breathes easier. See, miracles on a budget. You laugh once, then catch yourself. Humor here feels like contraband, precious and fragile. Outside, the wind howls, tugging at the tent flaps as if it wants to come in and finish what the knives began. The surgeon wipes his hands on a rag, leaving red streaks like crude art. "Winter's good for the dead," he says. "They don't spoil so fast." You don't know whether to laugh or cry, so you do neither. Instead, you watch him work with the strange tenderness of someone who stopped believing in salvation but still practices it anyway. Later, when night falls, you help fetch snow to chill the feverish. You carry bucket after bucket from the river, your fingers stiff, the handles biting through your gloves. The patients groan softly under blankets, the steam of their breath mingling with torch smoke. The tent glows like a lantern in the dark, fragile, temporary, human. You glance at the surgeon, who's fallen asleep sitting upright, head nodding over his stained apron. His hand still holds the scalpel loosely, as if afraid to let go of purpose. The scholars in some future century will write of progress of antiseptics, of medicine improved, of suffering reduced, and they'll be right. But looking at the tired faces around you, you think the real miracle is simpler, that anyone here still tries. You step outside, snow crunching beneath your boots, and tilt your head toward the stars. They burn cold and clear, indifferent witnesses to this endless theater of endurance. Behind you, someone coughs, someone prays, someone laughs at nothing at all. The night absorbs every sound. And as the frost creeps back across the camp, you realize that survival itself is a kind of surgery cutting away hope carefully, leaving just enough to heal by morning. By morning, the cold has turned the riverbank into glass again, and every step snaps like breaking prayers. The sun creeps up shyly, filtered through smoke and ice, and the camp feels strangely quiet. No hammering, no shouting, only the faint murmur of priests at work. They move among the tents wrapped in wool cloaks stiff with frost, holding candles whose flames bend in the wind but never quite die. You watch one kneel beside a soldier's cot, his breath forming halos around every whispered word. The man on the ground doesn't open his eyes, but the priest crosses him anyway, a small rebellion against the statistics of winter. The mainstream fact is that medieval armies were steeped in faith as much as in mud. Chaplains marched alongside soldiers, offering blessings before battle and confessions after it. Spiritual armor for men whose real armor froze overnight. During the 100 Years' War, some commanders even carried relics into camp. Fragments of saints' bones, slivers of the true cross, feathers supposedly fallen from angels' wings. The quirky tidbit comes from a record in Rouen describing a priest who claimed his holy water froze mid-blessing, capturing the grace inside. When it thawed, he insisted it worked twice as well. The scholarly debate that still divides historians concerns whether faith kept these armies alive or simply distracted them from dying. Standing here, you think maybe it did both. You find yourself drawn toward the chapel tent, a patchwork of canvas, wood, and hope. Inside, a dozen candles flicker around a makeshift altar, their smoke curling upward like questions no one intends to answer. The priest looks up and smiles. "You're early," he says, mistaking your curiosity for devotion. You shrug. "Couldn't sleep." "Then you fit right in," he says. You sit on a crate while he hums a hymn under his breath, the kind that was probably meant for summer fields, not frozen trenches. The words stumble over the cold, but their warmth lingers anyway. A soldier limps in, cradling a broken charm, half a wooden rosary, the other half lost in battle. "Can you fix it?" he asks. The priest studies it, then ties it together with a strip of thread. "It's not whole," the soldier says. "Neither am I," the priest replies gently. The moment passes like a flicker of heat, there and gone. You realize that faith here isn't about miracles, it's about maintenance. It's keeping the fire lit just long enough to see another sunrise. Outside, a group of men kneel in the snow, crossing themselves before breakfast. Their breaths rise in clouds that look like incense. Behind them, others curse, dice, and laugh. Nobody argues anymore about which group is right. The cold has made philosophers of everyone. Survival erases the lines between sinner and saint. One man mutters that frostbite is God's way of reminding you which fingers you used least in prayer. The camp laughs, and even the priest nearby doesn't correct him. Later that day, the wind picks up again, sharp as confession. The sky darkens, snow beginning to fall in slow spirals. The priest lights more candles, one by one, until the chapel glows like a fragile star against the storm. You help him anchor the tent ropes, your fingers numb but moving anyway. "Why keep lighting them?" you ask. "The wind will take them soon enough." He nods, eyes soft. "Then we light more." When night falls, you stand outside the chapel, watching snow pile against the canvas walls, hearing the faint echo of singing from within. It's not joyful singing, not exactly, more like endurance set to music. You tilt your head back and watch the snowflakes vanish into the dark, thinking about all the prayers lost to storms, all the ones that somehow made it through. Maybe faith isn't warmth at all. Maybe it's the courage to keep breathing when your breath turns to ice. And as you walk back toward your tent, you whisper a prayer you don't believe in, just to see if it leaves a mark on the cold air. It doesn't, but saying it feels like fire. It happens without warning. One night the wind rises, and by morning the world has vanished beneath a white so deep it swallows sound. You wake expecting the usual chaos, the shouting of sergeants, the groan of wagons, the slow percussion of hammers, but there is nothing. The air itself has gone soft, thick like a blanket pressed over the earth. For the first time in months, the war feels like it's holding its breath. You step outside and sink knee-deep into snow. No smoke, no flags, no enemies, just stillness. And in that stillness, you realize how loud your own heartbeat is. The mainstream fact is that several winters during the 100 Years' War forced temporary truces, not by treaty but by temperature. Snowstorms buried entire front lines, freezing rivers, filling trenches, and cutting off communication between commanders. Chroniclers called them the White Months, when soldiers on both sides became farmers of frost instead of wielders of steel. The quirky tidbit comes from a French journal describing an impromptu snowball fight between English and French sentries near Picardy, which drew no blood but much laughter. The scholarly debate that persists today questions whether these frozen truces softened the soldiers' hatred or merely postponed it. Watching this endless white, you think hatred itself must have frozen too. The sky is low and colorless, the kind that erases distance. Men wander the camp speaking softly, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Fires burn higher than usual, but even the crackle sounds hushed. A drummer sits near the embers, his instrument buried under his coat. "No point playing," he mutters. The snow plays louder. You nod. Because it's true. The flakes tap your helmet, your shoulders, your cheeks like the gentlest of enemies. There's no anger in this weather, only exhaustion. By midday, both camps, the one you call yours and the one across the field, disappear into fog. It's impossible to tell where France ends and England begins. Scouts return reporting nothing but whiteness. Men vanishing into mist, horses sinking chest-deep in drifts. For once, nobody argues over maps. The war has become a rumor muffled by snow. You stand at the edge of camp and watch the wind fill in the footprints of soldiers, erasing the evidence of anyone ever being here. It feels like forgiveness or perhaps amnesia. Someone begins to sing, a low wordless tune that ripples through the still air. One voice becomes two, then five, until the whole camp hums quietly. The melody doesn't belong to any nation. It belongs to the cold, to breath, to survival. You close your eyes and join in. The sound drifts outward, crossing the invisible border to where the enemy camps must be. No arrows, no horns, just the faint echo of human voices stitched together by winter. That night, the fires burn in both camps, visible through the snowfall. Tiny islands of orange light floating in a sea of gray. You can almost believe you're looking at reflections of yourselves. Across the field, a figure waves, small and distant. Someone near you waves back. No words, no truce spoken, just a silent acknowledgement that for one night at least, everyone's enemy is the weather. You fall asleep, listening to the snow drift against the tent, the muffled rhythm of flakes replacing drums. It's the gentlest silence you've ever known. And as you drift toward dreams, you wonder whether peace might simply be the world getting too cold and too tired to keep shouting. When the snow finally melts, it doesn't reveal spring, only mud and bones. The rivers swell with what the frost forgot, and the air turns heavy, swollen with the scent of rot and wet earth. You walk through what used to be farmland, but the fields lie empty, the furrows flooded, the barns collapsed under the weight of memory. Every step feels wrong, too soft, as though the ground itself is tired of carrying the living. The peasants who remain dig at the soil with sticks, hoping for roots or miracles. Nothing answers. The earth's patience, like everyone else's, has run out. The mainstream fact is that the winters of the 1430s brought famine across France and England. Crop yields failed after successive floods, and armies too hungry to wait raided villages that were already starving. Bread riots erupted in Paris and Rouen. Even nobles began eating what they once fed their horses. The quirky tidbit comes from a monk's ledger, noting that desperate farmers planted boiled grain, trusting God to unboil it by Easter. Historians still debate whether that's fact or metaphor, though you suspect no one jokes during famine. You pass a cottage with smoke trickling weakly from the chimney. Inside, an old woman stirs a pot of something that smells faintly of moss and onion. She looks at you, then at your armor, then back at the pot. "There's enough," she says simply. You take a spoonful and find it tastes of rainwater and endurance. "You fight for the king?" she asks. You shrug. "I fight for whoever eats last." She laughs once, softly, like a cough. "Then you'll be king soon." Her dog, little more than bones wrapped in fur, lies by the fire, too tired to bark. You leave her a coin, though it feels like an insult to pay for kindness. Outside, you meet a farmer digging near a frozen ditch. "Looking for seed?" you ask. "No," he says, "for last year." He gestures toward the ground. You look closer and realize he's turning up skulls. You don't ask whose. The wind carries the faint scent of smoke from a mile off. Another village burning its last stores of hay for warmth. The sky has that strange color again, neither gray nor blue, the shade of hopeless compromise. By nightfall, the camp has grown quieter. Rations shrink. The bread is darker now, mixed with ground bark and whatever else passes for flour. You chew slowly, pretending not to notice the bitterness. Someone jokes that the cooks are experimenting with forest cuisine, and for once nobody laughs. Across the fire, a priest murmurs grace over his meal, thanking heaven for enough. You repeat the word silently until it feels like a spell. The scholars of the future will call this resource scarcity, an elegant term for starvation. They'll measure it in ledgers and graphs, tracing lines that never touch faces. But here, in this moment, famine isn't numbers, it's the creak of an empty barn, the sound of a mother humming so her children can't hear her stomach. You stare into the flames and imagine each spark as a stalk of wheat, rising, burning, gone. When sleep comes, it brings strange dreams, green fields, bright sun, laughter that doesn't echo. You wake with tears frozen on your face. Outside, the moon shines on puddles where crops should be. The reflection looks like silver scattered carelessly across the mud. Precious, beautiful, useless. You whisper to no one. Maybe next year. The words vanish into the damp air. Another seed swallowed by the ground dot. The thaw doesn't bring comfort, only revelation. The snow recedes like a curtain, and what lies beneath is not spring but history. You walk along a half-frozen trench that cuts through the hills like an old wound, its edges glittering under a weak sun. The water inside is dark, slow, thick with last year's debris. Helmets, splintered shields, bones polished smooth by the cold. Here and there, the frost still clings to shapes that could be armor or the memory of it. The air smells faintly of iron and something older, like forgotten breath. You stop beside a mound where the ice glows faint blue, as if the world itself were preserving its own mistakes for future inspection. The mainstream fact. When winter broke after major battles of the 100 Years' War, scavengers and burial crews unearthed soldiers encased in frost, their gear and flesh preserved so perfectly that survivors swore they recognized faces months dead. Chroniclers compared it to seeing men sleeping beneath glass. The quirky tidbit belongs to a Flemish traveler who wrote that one such body, thawed and refrozen repeatedly, became an object of pilgrimage. Locals called him Saint Freud, the cold saint, and left coins and bread by his resting place for luck. The scholarly debate lingers on whether this reverence was superstition, grief, or just the human need to make sense of endurance. Standing here, you think maybe it was gratitude, an acknowledgement that even death had the courtesy to wait until spring. You kneel beside the trench and brush away a thin layer of ice from a fallen banner. The fabric cracks beneath your glove, the emblem long gone, colors bled into anonymity. The silence feels heavier here, as if sound itself respects the boundary between the living and those who didn't quite make it through the frost. A crow lands nearby, its beak tapping on the ice with delicate precision. You toss it a crust of bread. Payment for services rendered. You whisper. The bird cocks its head, as though it understands the joke. Farther along the ridge, you find relics half buried in the slush. A rosary tangled in a mail shirt, a cup turned upside down, a dagger with the blade snapped clean in two. You hold the dagger up to the light, and catch your reflection in its rusted edge. Thin, pale, eyes rimmed in fatigue. It's a face that could easily join the collection beneath your boots. For the first time in weeks, you feel the absurd urge to apologize to the ground. When the sun dips low, the ice begins to melt faster, water pooling in shallow hollows that mirror the sky. You crouch by one, mesmerized. In the reflection, the clouds look like sails drifting across an inverted sea. For a fleeting second, you imagine all those frozen soldiers beneath the surface watching the world move again, wondering how it feels to thaw. The wind picks up, carrying the faint sound of bells from some far-off village. You stand, brush the frost from your cloak, and take one last look at the trench. The water glimmers, ripples, then settles again, calm, cold, final. You realize that this war will end someday, but its artifacts will linger, frozen reminders of how stubborn humanity can be. As you head back toward camp, your boots breaking through thin ice with every step, the rhythm sounds almost like applause, muted, slow, approving. Maybe it's the ghosts. Maybe it's your own imagination, but you let them clap. You've survived another day among the shadows, and that, in this endless winter, feels like the closest thing to grace. The mainstream fact. In the spring of 1436, after one of the hardest winters of the 100 Years' War, entire regiments simply stopped marching. Not from mutiny, but exhaustion. The land itself demanded rest. Armies scattered into forests and towns, seeking warmth, food, or forgiveness. The quirky tidbit comes from a diary kept by an English squire who wrote that men knelt to the sunrise as if it were a new king, and some even offered the sun coins for safe passage through the months ahead. The scholarly debate that survives today asks whether this collective reverence marked early signs of war weariness or simple gratitude. You think it doesn't matter which, either way, they'd earned it. You walk to the edge of what used to be a frozen river. The ice has cracked into long mirrors that shiver under the sun, reflecting light so fiercely it stings your eyes. You bend down and touch the surface. It's soft, alive, running again. A single fish darts through the meltwater, its scales flashing like a coin flipping in slow motion, life gambling on itself once more. Behind you, someone laughs. Not the brittle laughter of winter, but the kind that comes from somewhere below the ribs. Two soldiers are hanging their clothes to dry, the wind turning the fabric into bright dancing flags. You can smell bread baking. Real bread this time from flour found in a merchant's wagon that somehow escaped spoilage. The scent drifts through camp and makes your stomach ache in the best possible way. A priest stands near the fire, holding his hands up to the warmth, muttering that maybe hell isn't fire after all. Maybe it's frost. Everyone agrees. As the day lengthens, the sun reveals the battlefield for what it truly is. A field, not a curse. Tiny shoots of green push through the dirt between broken arrows. The crows still circle, but even they seem lazy now, full and satisfied. You sit in the grass, feeling the ground thaw beneath you, and realize you can hear running water again. It's the first sound of peace you've known in years. Someone shouts that the king's messengers have arrived with orders for the next campaign. A groan ripples through the camp. But even that groan sounds softer than it would have a month ago, like men remembering how to complain with life still in their throats. The captain reads the orders aloud. New marches, new sieges, same names, different dates, and the men nod with the weary acceptance of those who have outlived their own expectations. As night falls, the fires burn brighter than they have in months, no longer symbols of defiance but of celebration. The stars return, unbothered, glittering over a landscape that looks almost forgiven. You stretch your hands toward the flames, feel real warmth on your skin, and whisper a small foolish prayer. Not to win, not to survive, but just for one more sunrise. The frost has left your armor, but not your bones. You'll march again soon. You know that. Yet tonight, as the earth exhales steam and the river murmurs to itself, you allow the thought you've been too cold to feel all winter. Maybe the world still remembers how to begin again. The spring keeps advancing, though the war pretends not to notice. The roads are rivers of mud now, the air thick with the smell of thawed soil and rotting hay. Every footstep releases ghosts, the stench of what was buried too shallow, the clink of rusting mail, the soft collapse of forgotten wood. The snow has retreated into ditches and shade, but it hasn't gone. It lingers like memory, bright where the sunlight doesn't quite reach. You walk through the half-wet field that used to be a battlefield and feel the strange unease of a place remembering itself. The mainstream fact, long after armies moved on, peasants and friars spent years collecting bones from the 100 Years' War battlefields. At Agincourt alone, accounts tell of thousands burned or buried together. By spring the ground sprouted white with the small fragments that frost had pushed upward. The quirky tidbit comes from a 15th century French villager who claimed his wheat grew thicker where the dead slept, and he harvested it only for communion bread. The scholarly debate that still drifts through academic journals is whether medieval people viewed these remains with reverence or simple practicality. You think they didn't separate the two. Reverence and practicality were the same language spoken in different tones. In the field you find what the thaw has gifted back. An arrowhead wedged in a root, a strip of leather curled like a question mark, a coin fused to rust. You brush the dirt away and realize the coin bears no face anymore, just the worn suggestion of a crown. The metal is warm from the sun, absurdly alive in your palm. You slip it into your pocket, though you know it won't buy anything. It's just proof that something endured. By noon, farmers from a nearby hamlet arrive with carts, collecting debris before the planting. They work silently, moving the fragments into piles, iron in one, bone in another. You help without speaking. A child running behind the cart stops and stares at a half-buried helmet. She tugs it free, fills it with water, and sets it beside a sprouting patch of grass as if it were a bowl for rain. Her mother nods approval. There's a strange peace in this reordering of the world. Death turned into a vessel again. At the edge of the field stands a small wooden cross, its paint nearly gone. Someone has carved new letters over the old ones, the dates overlapping so badly you can't tell which war they belong to. The wood hums faintly in the wind, and for a moment you imagine all the names that never found a place to rest. History, you realize, is just the earth's habit of remembering us unevenly. As the sun lowers, the field glows gold where the snow used to lie. You crouch, press your hand to the ground, and feel it pulse with slow warmth. The mud stains your fingertips, but you don't wipe it away. Behind you, the carts creak off toward the village, their wheels cutting through puddles that flash with evening light. The smell of turned soil follows them, a scent not of decay anymore, but of work waiting to begin. You stay until the first stars appear, watching the frost retreat one last time into the shadows. The land is quiet now, the kind of quiet that holds space for memory instead of fear. You think about all that the snow concealed: cruelty, courage, exhaustion, absurd laughter, and you realize it never really hid them, it preserved them, the way ice keeps fruit until someone's ready to taste it again. When you finally rise, the air feels almost warm. You look back at the field, its edges blurred by mist, and you whisper not to the dead, not to the past, but to the soil itself, "You can rest now." The wind answers softly, carrying the scent of new grass, and for the first time since the war began, it feels like the world is listening. The day ends quietly, no horns, no orders, no sudden alarms, only the soft sigh of a world that's finally tired of arguing with itself. You sit beside a small fire near what used to be the front line, the mud drying to cracked earth beneath your boots. Around you, the camp settles into murmurs, men sharpening tools they no longer plan to use, a few voices trading half-hearted songs, someone laughing too softly for anyone to scold. The air tastes of wood smoke and bread, and for the first time in years it doesn't sting. The flames paint everything in amber, helmets, hands, faces, all glowing like pieces of the same story. You think about the months that folded into one another. Snow on tents, frost on letters, the hiss of rain on iron, and how survival slowly turned from duty into instinct. The mainstream fact will say the 100 Years' War ended in treaties and signatures, but you know it really ended in exhaustion, in the way soldiers stopped waking at the sound of thunder. The quirky tidbit will tell of an English knight who, upon hearing of peace, refused to believe it until he saw his pay delayed, declaring only peace could make the king that stingy. And the scholarly debate still argues whether centuries of conflict made Europe stronger or merely older. Sitting here, you feel certain of at least one thing: age always wins. The night deepens, and conversation fades. Someone tosses another log on the fire, and the sparks rise lazily, climbing into a sky so clear it almost hurts to look at. You stretch your hands toward the heat and watch the light flicker through your fingers. Beyond the glow, the land is dark and quiet, the same hills that once rang with steel now whispering with grass. You can almost hear the soil knitting itself back together. The wind moves gently through the camp, lifting the smell of smoke, bread, and damp earth, wrapping it all in one slow breath of forgiveness. Your eyelids grow heavy. You lean back against your pack, feeling the warmth soak through the last chill clinging to your bones. The fire crackles, softer now, as if it too is running out of stories. You think of the monks, the women, the archers, the peasants, the surgeons, all the tiny lives that built the scaffolding of history and were forgotten once the banners were folded away. You hope someone, someday, will remember how it felt to live through nights below freezing and still find laughter. The flames shrink to embers. The stars blur at the edges. You let your thoughts slow, letting each breath stretch a little longer than the one before. The world feels distant but kind, humming somewhere between sleep and silence. Your last clear image is of the fire's glow reflecting in the puddles, small suns trembling on the ground. The warmth lingers on your palms like a promise you don't need to keep. The sounds fade. The wind, the voices, the crackle, and even the cold seems to pause out of courtesy. You close your eyes, breathing once more, slower, lighter, until thought itself drifts away with the smoke. End of script. Sweet dreams.